Hello, my name is Andy and I am the Village Idiot. I'm armed with a car and a GoPro and an unhealthy amount of time on my hands. I'm using that time to attempt to visit every civil parish in England. You're watching the Harrogate series. Harrogate is a large borough, one of the 11 districts of North Yorkshire. It's got 139 civil parishes. Which one are we in this episode? Welcome back to Harrogate once again, everybody. It's actually turning out to be quite a nice morning, this. There's no rain in the air and there are patches of blue sky, so hopefully this one's going to be a nice walk. We already know it's a nice day, of course, because we saw Nidd last week and that was fairly good, wasn't it? Weather seems to be improving. Okay, where am I today? Well, I'm at the end of a dead-end road here in a very small village that's on the A61. It has very few landmarks, but it does have a river, it does have a pub, and it also has a church. We're going to see all of those and a few other bits and bobs besides. Welcome to the parish of South Stainley with Cayton. Here's my disclaimer for people who may be watching me for the first time. I say things as I would in my native accent and dialect. As a result, I may not pronounce things in the same way as the locals do. Remember, I'm a visitor. It's impossible to know everything. Leave me a comment, spin me a like, and bash that subscribe button. Let's get to today's parish video. South Stainley with Cayton, Stoney Forest Clearing. This week in Harrogate, we're back on the A61, just to the north of Ripley. It's there where we find a tiny, mostly linear settlement that sits either side of a watercourse. Its name is South Stainley, although historically this was sometimes known as Kirk or Church Stainley, owing to the presence of its small religious building. For those wondering, yes, there is a North Stainley, but that's for another episode. There is a second settlement in these boundaries, the deserted medieval village of Cayton, which was once the location of a grange established by Fountains Abbey in the Middle Ages. Its earthwork remains still survive, but they're publicly inaccessible. South Stainley has a limited number of landmarks, but that doesn't mean it's totally disinteresting. In fact, it's far from it. Running through the village is a beck, which starts in the hills to the west before emptying into the River Ure. As it hits the village, it flows under a cute little bridge. Running parallel with the A61 is an old railway line too, one we've briefly mentioned before. The place also has a pub, which doubles as a hotel, and South Stainley was once the home of Richard Butler at one point too, the former president of Yorkshire Cricket Club, who once owned Nidd Hall. So in short, there's a lot here then, isn't there? Let's walk and find out more about it all. We start with the church, located on the far eastern fringes of the village at the furthest point away from the A61. Dedicated to St Wilfrid, it's one of the smaller places of worship you'll ever come across. It's still a Grade 2 listed building though. Although a religious building has existed in the village for centuries, this one is fairly recent and it stands on the site of an earlier church. Some carved stones from that old church still remain. It was built in 1845 of magnesian limestone that originated from nearby quarries at Stainley Gill. It cost the princely sum of £800 to build back then, probably not enough these days to re-roof the porch. It's also on a fairly steep hill too, and that offers you a nice view of the surrounding countryside. South Stainley though is mainly flat because it's in a valley, and the churchyard is sort of an exception to the rule. Close to the church, on the flat now, are Bridge Cottage, which is this brilliant white house, and the old vicarage, which sits behind it up a drive. A vicarage, of course, is never far from its church. Bridge Cottage gets its name from this humpback bridge that crosses a watercourse, splitting South Stainley into two pieces. This is Stainley Beck, which often floods, but not badly. In fact, there are areas around the Beck which are designed to cope with the extra water. The Beck begins in the hills east of Pateley Bridge, before flowing through Markington and South Stainley and emptying into Robert Beck at the parish boundary. That then forms a tributary of the River Ure. I like this bridge, by the way. I thought it was quite quaint. Next, it's a run of houses. South Stainley is laid out mainly along one street, Church Lane, and it's a dead end. That's because beyond St Wilfrid's Church it turns into a private road that forms part of the Mount Garrett estate. You'll recall that name from the Nidd episode. South Stainley is where Richard Butler, the 17th Viscount Mountgarrett, moved to in the 1960s when he sold Nidd Hall. Butler was a soldier, a captain in the Irish Guards. After retiring, he became president of Yorkshire Cricket Club, a title he held between 1984 and 1989. As we hit the A61, we find the local pub. Simply called the Inn these days, this used to be known as the Red Lion. Clearly very old externally, the interior is now much more modern. It was redeveloped in the 1930s as a roadhouse and is now also a hotel. Right outside the pub you can get a bus, handy if you're staggering after a visit. South Stainley is served by the number 36 to Ripon. On the other side of the road is a garden centre, Hoplants, which does quite well at this time of year because it sells Christmas trees. Almost dead opposite the pub is a short tunnel on Water Lane. The road through it runs to a farm, but it's what this tunnel is carrying that we're interested in here. It's an old railway line, the former Leeds to Northallerton line no less. It runs almost parallel with the A61 through the village and behind a house which I thought might have been a station. Further research though told me that Wormald Green was the nearest station to South Stainley. The route was closed in 1967, which ended over 100 years of service between the cities of Leeds and Ripon. Where the route of the line crosses the A61, there's a little lane with some fascinating buildings, including an old schoolhouse and this, the Old Village Institute, with its gorgeous timber exterior. This has now been converted into a 3-bedroom house. Best building in the village for me, this. The lane then crosses a small stream which flows into Stainley Beck before reaching a terraced row, the only one in the village, suggesting that this is its oldest part. Among these buildings is an old forge which probably harnessed the power of the water. The last part of the walk sees us amble for a short way alongside Stainley Beck and back to the bridge. In doing so, we cross another bridge over the smaller stream. As we mentioned earlier, Stainley Beck has areas which often flood, and this is one of them. Water has always been in abundance in this area because there are 2 natural water sources in the boggy Beckside, both marked by wooden signs. They're wells with diametrically opposed names, Sweet and Bitter. I couldn't find much about them, but you can't miss them if you walk this bridleway. Okay, we've made it back to the bridge. Just want to show you something here that I noticed by the side of it. Look at this golden pump. And it still works, that handle still moves. Obviously there's no water coming out of it these days, but yeah, there's the pump there. And also you've got a parish notice board next to it, so you know what that means. It's never easy when it's wet to stick them on the parish notice boards, but there we are. South Stainley with Cayton is in the books. However, we've done South Stainley, we haven't yet talked about Cayton. Well, Cayton's a deserted medieval village and it's to the west of South Stainley, to the west of the A61. There is one property out there that still exists, but we can't access it because it's up a private road. So that is the subject of today's special section. Cayton is a deserted medieval village which lies to the west of the A61. It was the site of a monastic grange, effectively a farm run by a monastery. In this case, the monastery was Fountains Abbey and Cayton Grange was one of its earliest. It specialised in fish farming, and as you can imagine, it had lots of fish ponds. Pottery was also produced at Cayton Grange, and the remains of both activities survive today in the form of burial mounds and earthworks which retain important evidence of the economy of the abbey. A scheduled monument, Cayton Grange occupies part of a valley known as Cayton Gill, which lies to the immediate south of a modern farm. After the dissolution of Fountains Abbey in 1539, some of the Grange buildings remained in use until the construction of the old hall at High Cayton in 1607. The hall that stands today, though, was built later, in 1770, for John Messenger. Between the hall and the modern farm at the Grange, Cayton accounts for 9 of the 12 listed buildings in the parish, but they're all on private property. And after making my way back to the car, I drove along Church Lane towards the A61 to finish this one off. Time to move on to the next one, but which way am I going? Am I going left towards Harrogate, or am I going right towards Ripon? Well, you'll just have to come back next week and find out, won't you? See you later, all. Thanks for watching this video, folks. Don't forget to like this episode if you haven't already. It really makes a difference with YouTube. If you're new here, subscribe to the channel for more videos like this, and give us a share too if you've got friends who'd like it. You can find all the links to my social media accounts below, as well as my Buy Me a Coffee page where you can donate to the channel. Also, if you've enjoyed this episode, have a look at some more videos in this series. Until next time, I've been Andy, also known as the Village Idiot, and I'm out.